Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're continuing along our journey through the book Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini, The Psychology of Persuasion. Great book so far. We're going to be continuing with Chapter 2, getting into the first principle, the first of 7 principles of persuasion that Dr. Cialdini outlines in this book. And we're starting off with reciprocation. And just as like a general overview, I always think of just reciprocation like you're reciprocating something. So something does something for you, you do something for them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing. Like somebody gives you flour, your neighbor gives you flour for baking, and then you return the favor by giving them the exact same flour back. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. And we're going to talk about that later on in this chapter about the exchanges can be unequal sometimes. So they give you flour, you give them back a helping hand, you give them a ride somewhere when their car is broken down, something like that. So that's kind of what reciprocation means to me. And it's the first principle that we're going to take a look at. Let's go to the first slide. Christmas cards. There we go. There it is. A professor that sent out Christmas cards to strangers. So the professor who sent the Christmas cards out to strangers, he received cards back from the strangers. Even without them knowing who he was, he still got cards back. And Robert uses this story to outline reciprocation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody you know very well. People are going to tend to reciprocate things just on the basis of not wanting to have to deal with the obligation of paying somebody back. So reciprocation, we should try to repay what another person has provided us. That's kind of like the basic definition, if you will, of reciprocation. In researchers approaching investment bankers for a large donation for charity, he tells this other story, right? So if they asked for donations for the charity, they didn't really get a lot of responses. They didn't really get a lot of compliance with this. Not a lot of people donated. Compared to if they preceded the ask with a small packet of sweets, contributions to the charity more than doubled. So again, reciprocation in action. You give a little something, and then you get a little something back. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't always have to be an equal exchange. In this case, a little, chocolate, and they donate kind of a lot of money back. I'm assuming, right? So they donate like $10. Even one little chocolate is not $10. So you see the potential for an unequal exchange there. But it's because of this obligation. And people don't like to have indebtedness. It's like I think Dr. Cialdini talks about it. It's like a evolutionary mechanism that we don't like to have that weight on our shoulders that we owe somebody, because you have the chances of being tainted and being shunned by society. Because when people see that, oh, you're just a moocher, evolutionarily, we're all tribal beings. So the potential to be shunned from your group is very, very dangerous, potentially. So obligation, I mentioned this word obligation. Obligation, much obliged has become a synonym for thank you. So obligation, it comes from one of the earliest, was written, finished in 1215. Employed it to define at outbreak of war, countries should treat merchants from the enemy nation. If our men are safe there, the others should be safe in our land. So this is like one of the earliest versions or earliest writings that you see reciprocation. Hey, if If our merchants go over there, they should be protected. They should feel safe because they're going to feel safe in our land as well. And this is where obligation comes in. Obligation to future repayment, favors, gifts, invitations, friendly actions, etc. So typical is it for indebtedness to accompany the receipt of such things that a phrase such as much obliged has become a synonym for thank you, not only in the English language, but in other languages. So much obliged is like a thank you. And obliged comes from repaying somebody for the favor that they did to you, that it's become synonymous with just thank you. You, by virtue of paying back your favor, are saying thank you. And then there's this Japanese word too, sumimasen, which in its literal form means this will not end. Japanese word for thank you, meaning this will not end, meaning that the relationship and it really is, something that is good for society. It's something that makes us all human, which is what Dr. Cialdini outlines here from an archaeologist, Richard Leakey, where Richard Leakey says, we all learn to share food, share skill. This made a difference in the social evolution of our species, knowing that you can lower your inhibitions and you can give something up knowing that you're going to get it back later. And this trade and these transactions that take place propelled society forward because you had something that somebody else didn't have. So you gave a favor to them by giving them begins to fall in place from there. Trade, gift giving, defense, aid, a whole society just is born from that. So there's a story that Dr. Cialdini highlights on page 25, this story between Ethiopia and Mexico where, let's see here, $5,000 of relief aid that was exchanged between Mexico and Ethiopia. In 1985, Ethiopia could justly lay claim to the greatest suffering and privation in the world. So Ethiopia lent Mexico $5,000 for this crazy earthquake, was it? Donation to that wretchedly needy country. I recall my feeling of amazement, though, when a news item I was reading insisted that the aid had gone in the opposite direction to send money to help the victims of that year's earthquakes in Mexico City. So Ethiopia, not a very rich country, decides to send money that they could probably use in their own country to Mexico to help with this earthquake effort. And what ends up happening is Dr. Cialdini looks into it and sees that, okay, in 1935, Mexico had sent aid to Ethiopia when it was invaded by Italy. So simply, this exchange in 1985 was a return of that favor. It was a reciprocation. And on another smaller scale, they have these readers' reports. They're like figures, tables, like extra sections in the book. So there's this reader's report from an employee of the state of Oregon where this employee's boss keeps on giving her gifts, and it makes her really think twice before trying to apply to other positions or go seek employment elsewhere because her boss is just so nice and has taken care of her really, really well. She doesn't really want to go anywhere else. So reciprocation is a very, very powerful thing. So how does it exactly work? Why is it so powerful? Well, again, it's this general distaste for people who constantly take and don't give. The moochers. The moochers, we're all guilty of it. We all feel guilty when we do that. And there was this experiment by Dennis Regan art experiment. This starts on page 28. So there was a scenario where an assistant they're in this like art museum, right? And the assistant goes to get a can of pop for a subject that is rating art in the museum. So the subject is like the one who's being experimented on here. They don't know what's going on. They don't know nothing. So in the first scenario, the assistant goes to get 2 cans of pop, gets one for himself and one for the subject. In the second scenario is kind of like the control. So nothing is given to the subjects. And after the paintings have been rated, the subject was asked to purchase raffle tickets. I'm kind of skipping out on a lot of details, but this is kind of like the basic gist of it. So the subject who was given the can of pop purchased twice as many raffle tickets as the control subject. So the subjects who were, they rated the art, they were given the can of pop. Oh yeah, here, I have an extra pop here. Why don't you have it? Oh, by the way, you want to buy some raffle tickets? They bought twice as many raffle tickets, the ones who were given the pop. And it's crazy. I guess it's not really crazy. It's just intuitively it makes sense. You're given something and you don't want the debt on your shoulders. So you would almost do anything to take the weight off of it. Take the weight off your shoulders of that indebtedness. And as we're going to see, the people ended up buying raffle tickets that exceeded the total value of the can of pop. And Dr. Cialdini says, yes, the rule of reciprocation is very overpowering because the Reagan study also tested the liking principle, which is something we're going to talk about a couple chapters down in this book. The tendency, it's another tendency or another tenet of influence, one of those 7 principles, to where you're more likely to comply with things when it's being asked from somebody who is like you. But reciprocation kind of overpowered this liking principle. So even those subjects that bought more raffle tickets, subjects who liked the experimenter bought more raffle tickets from the experimenter. So they did test this as well. Now, liking had been wiped out by the favor of the can of pop because the sense of obligation to repay overran the liking of the experimenter, and they saw this in those subjects who were given the can of pop, disliked the experimenter, but they still bought the raffle tickets. So the experimenter comes back with the can of pop, gives it to him. The subject's like, hey, dude, I don't really like you. I'll take the can of pop, but have a nice day. I don't like you. Experimenter comes up to him, hey, I know you don't like me, but would you want to buy some raffle tickets? The people who still dislike the experimenter bought raffle tickets. So it's a very powerful rule, powerful principle of influence that outshines other principles. And Dr. Cialdini says that in order to really accentuate the power from this rule when you're using it out in everyday life is don't minimize the favor. So I do this all the time where I say, oh, dude, it's no big deal. It's no issue. Yeah, man, I got you, bro. I know you would do the same for me. Well, sorry. All the ones that I said before that, that's like you diminishing it. Oh, yeah, no problem at all. Oh, yeah, no sweat. He's saying accentuate it when you do a favor for somebody. Hey, I know you do the same for me. I got you because I know we're bros, and if the positions were reversed, you would do the same thing for me. Because now it kind of highlights the obligation. It makes it way more likely that they're going to reciprocate that favor to you. What do we got here? Page 32. Let me go to page 32. Ah, yes, the small gifts. The small gifts, the art of the free sample. So, how many times have you guys seen, where I see this a lot was in Costco. Whenever I would go into Costco when I was younger, I used to love going to the free sample tables. Oh my God, they were all over the store, right? All over the store. Used to love going up to them, but there's a reason why they do that. There's a reason why those free samples now, in order to get people to buy the things that they are sampling. It's reciprocation. Hey, here's a small favor of this free sample, and if you like it, there's this whole shelf of that sample that you can buy right now. It's a very powerful tool, like as we've stated. So Robert highlights some other examples of the reciprocation taking place with some other studies where they do a survey study where they give a small monetary gift for taking a survey, and they get twice as many return surveys when they give out $50 after sending the survey back, twice as many return surveys as giving out. I think what they did here was they gave a little monetary gift when they sent the survey. They got twice as many responses as when they sent out the survey and they said, oh, you'll get $50 when you return the survey to us, like a rebate. So they found that it was way better to slip them money up front versus giving them money on the back end for taking the survey. Another example, customers, they did a study on customers were given a candy or a mint with their bill at a restaurant, and it increased the tips for that waiter or waitress that had that table. And then this experiment, the Helen Mankin McDonald's experiment, where customers were given balloons when they entered versus when they left. And they found that the total customer check was 25% higher when the balloon was given first versus when the balloon was given after they have left. Because you think about it, the whole thing with reciprocation is the favor should come first before you cash in on the ask. So when you're giving the balloon after they leave, I mean, it's great, right? It probably makes them feel good, but they're more likely to kind of forget about that favor the next time they come in, right? They're going to go home. They're going to do other things, tend to their family, play video games, read a book, go to work, all that kind of stuff. They're going to tend to forget about that favor that you just did by giving them that balloon. But you do it up front while they're in the restaurant. Well, okay, now it's way more ingrained in their mind. They're going to tend to spend a little more money as a return of that favor. And reciprocation, I mean, this takes place in politics, no doubt. I mean, how many times have we heard the stories of people Congress who votes on a bill is voting on it in a certain way because of the favors that the company who's going to be affected by the bill, influences that particular congressman. Voting for a bill as a favor returned to the bill's sponsor, right? This kind of stuff happens all the time. Politicians become indebted to those companies who those bills are going to affect because those companies are doing favors for those Congress people, right? Famous example here, Lyndon Johnson, who had a long career in Senate, and he helped out a ton of people back when he was in the House and Senate, Robert writes, and when it came time for him to enter the White House, he called in on a lot of those favors, and he was able to push a lot of legislation through and have a very successful presidency in terms of just getting things passed through the House and Senate. And this kind of ties to today, where Robert highlights, you have presidents like Obama and Trump that ran on saying, oh, I'm not a part of Washington. I'm indebted to no one, which is cool, but also you can't call in on any favors like Lyndon did, because you don't know anybody, or you know less people than like the other average politician, etc. So it makes it a little bit tougher. It's kind of a shady business, but at the same time, it's kind of how things get moved around too. Kind of how like just progress is made. Bills are come to fruition versus just having everything come about through executive action, right? And another thing that was highlighted in regards to companies influencing people was this calcium channel blocking controversy, where medication, drugs, calcium channel blockers, and they were not very good. The drugs were not they shouldn't have been as reputable as they were made out to be. And what ended up happening was the scientists who repped these drugs and said, oh no, these drugs are good, 100% of the scientists who found and published results supportive of the drugs had received prior support from the pharmaceutical companies that developed them. And only 37% of those critical with the drugs had received some sort of support. So there you go. It's reciprocation. Hey, we give you a little favor, money, benefits, etc., and you write a positive review of our drug that's supposed to come on the market. Crazy. I guess not crazy. It's the power of reciprocation. And this last point here, U.S. congressional representatives who received the most special interest group money were 7 times likely to vote in favor of that group. 83% winning percentage. Shows you the power of reciprocation. And a very famous example from history was this Cuban Missile Crisis, which, as it stood after this happened in October 22nd, 1962, year my dad was born, it was the kind of, the way the history books told this story was that JFK flexed his muscles and would not budge from his position that Russian nuclear missiles had to be shipped out of Cuba. They had to get them out there. We're going to put up this naval blockade. No more missiles coming to Cuba from the Soviet Union. And in the end, the missiles were removed from Cuba. JFK was hailed for this as being like a staunch, like strong figure in this. But really, as documents and as history went on and as documents released, telling the real story about what happened was Kennedy had actually used reciprocation instead of just like brute, arrogance and strength. He actually ended up, the U.S. removed Jupiter missiles from Turkey and Italy in return for Khrushchev removing missiles from Cuba. So it was an act of reciprocation at its finest, at a very, very tense time in our country. What do we got here? Oh, some more stuff on the free sample, page 38. Let me see. Page 38. Release the natural indebting force inherent in a gift while innocently appearing to have only the intention to inform. And this is Robert's talking more here on the free sample. 42% more likely to have purchased something based on if they had received a free piece of candy. He's referring to this study from a Southern California candy shop. Researchers examined the buying patterns of customers who either did or did not receive a free piece of candy as they entered. Those who did, 42% more likely to purchase the candy. Even though they didn't buy that particular candy. That's the interesting thing about this. Something kind of we mentioned earlier. The candy that they were given as a free sample isn't even the one that they necessarily bought, but they were just obligated to purchase something from the store. So I guess going back to my Costco example, that free sample that's given, they're not necessarily going to just buy that free sample, but they're going to feel obligated to buy other. But they would leave this bag containing their products with the customer and say, use as much as little as you want, and I'll come back in a couple days and pick it up. And when they come back, what ends up happening is the customer uses it, uses some of the products in there, and then feels obligated to purchase the actual sizes, not just the sample sizes, the actual products themselves. And Amway has had a lot of success with this. Lots of success. It says here, many such customers yield to a sense of obligation to order the products they have tried and partially consumed. And that's the Amway model. The reciprocity rule is so powerful that you need to be aware when it may be used against you. Damn right. And we're going to talk about one of the sections later, like one of the last sections we talk about. Robert writes in this chapter is the defense for this. So how do you defend against being overtaken by the reciprocity rule? Let's go ahead. We're going to talk about personalization via customization, because this is going to get into the three characteristics of the reciprocity rule. So personalization, uninvited debts, and unequal exchanges. So personalization. So it's one thing to give a gift, like give a candy, right? But it's another thing to give the candy in a very customized format for that particular customer. So you give the candy, but it comes with a message saying, thank you very much, much love, even if you could put the person's name on it too. Maybe you see this a lot like in mailed letters, like letters you get in the mail, prospecting for certain things. I get them with insurance, and they're directly messaged, addressed to me, and the letter in there is Dear Chris. So it's highly personable, way different than if you were just to send a generic letter. And this was another fast food restaurants giving you a key ring versus yogurt. The yogurt doubled the food purchased, tying the gift to the need. Okay, so here what they were saying was in the fast food restaurants, they took a look at giving different types of free samples. So earlier we had mentioned the balloon, right? Giving the balloon led to a 25% increase in the total food spent at that particular fast food restaurant. But now if they were to give something like yogurt, the sales would probably increase even more, because Robert's saying here, you're tying the gift to the need. You're not kind of just giving something random, which works too. I mean, you saw in the candy store experiment, they didn't just buy that candy. They bought anything in the store, right? But the fact of the matter is, it was a candy. So you're giving something kind of relevant, basically. Although it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be, but you're giving something relevant to the need of the person to increase your compliance. Here's another interesting thing. There was a review of the highest reviews weren't among those guests who just had an outstanding experience from top down, from beginning of stay to the end of stay. They were actually from guests who had a negative experience and got it immediately corrected. So you come in, you get the key to your room, you go to your room, and the bed's not made. So you phone the front desk, oh my God, our bed's not made. I just walked in here. And, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, sir. We're going to send somebody up there right away. And somebody comes up within like seconds, makes the bed, apologizes profusely. That sticks in people's minds because it makes it feel like they had specialized personal assistance just for them. The hotel dropped everything to send somebody up there right away and correct the mistake. You're going out of the way for somebody. Reviews than if it's just a bang bang experience from the beginning, which I'm sure is going to give high reviews, right? But maybe this time the high review comes with like an actual written review saying, oh my God, this is what happened. The service was tremendous. Versus somebody just saying, oh yeah, four stars. Oh yeah, 5 stars. This is what I do a lot of times. Next characteristic. Oh, uninvited debts. Triggering indebtedness by doing an uninvited favor. Oh yeah. So sometimes these favors can just come about when you're not even expecting, and all of a sudden you're left with an obligation to pay even though you didn't really want one. And this is another one of those characteristics. This is one of the other things that makes this reciprocity rule just so powerful. You're just throwing out a favor, and the other person really can't control that you just threw it out there. But now they just got a debt on their shoulders, and now they feel obligated to pay it back. I know we've mentioned this multiple times now, but what's going on here? You're initiating a relationship without the fear of a loss. Because again, evolutionarily, the weird feeling, the bad feeling you get by having this indebtedness on your shoulder, it makes sense. We have this obligation to give, to receive, and to pay. And you are in a powerful position when you get to dictate the reciprocity rule. So like in that Reagan study, the art rating study, the art museum study, the experimenter who got the Coke and then asked for the raffle ticket purchase, they're choosing the gift, choosing that it's a Coke, and then they're choosing the form of the return favor in the form of raffle tickets. So they could kind of mix and match. It didn't even have to be a Coke. It could have been a water, something a little bit less expensive, like, I don't know. It makes it very, very powerful. And again, it's an uninvited debt that the person is just going to kind of do anything to alleviate themselves of. Don't think of it too, and I like what Robert says here, you don't really want to think of it as a form of payment, but a form of a return offering of kindness. So you're not paying them back. You're not giving them, a can of Coke back, but you're just repaying the kindness. And oftentimes this can trigger unequal exchanges. So what do I mean by that? Again, the Reagan study, a 10-cent Coke. I don't know who buys a 10-cent. Well, granted, this book came out in 1984, so Coke was way cheaper back then. 10-cent can of Coke, but the raffle tickets were 25 cents. So shoot, somebody buys just like 5 raffle tickets there, and already you see the price difference. For a 10-cent Coke that the experimenter got for the subject, they bought 5 raffle tickets, $1.25. I mean, that's like over 100%, difference there. Most people find the state of indebtedness to be so uncomfortable, they're going to do anything to alleviate this pain. And like you see in the Reagan study, they're going to go above and beyond the value of the original favor just to repay that kindness. And again, this is a good thing. We were made to repay their debts, people who didn't return their favor, unless Robert says there is a reason for them not paying, which sometimes happens. Sometimes, if you give a homeless person money, are you going to expect them to repay that back? Well, not necessarily. So there's sometimes reasons for people not paying, and that's something important to think about. If you're using this rule, just think about that are you doing it for the expectation of getting something returned? Okay, that's fair. But think about the person that you are giving the favor to, and is it reasonable to expect them to repay you? Just something to think in your mind, because then if they don't, this could lead to, mixed signals, relationship issues. Like this example, Dr. Cialdini talks about is when you're at the bar and you're out talking to people of the opposite sex and you want to buy a drink for a woman, but it makes it a weird position, right? Because when a man buys a drink for a woman, now does the woman take the drink, and does she now feel obligated to be sexually available for that man? See, that's what I was talking about earlier, is if you're going to use the rule, kind of use it for good things, and just monitor your expectations on if the person is going to actually pay you back. Temper your expectations is kind of all I'm trying to say there. Like you do with families. With families, you give and you do favors for your family all the time, but you're not necessarily keeping score of like, okay, I did 2 favors for you. I'm not going to do any until you repay back one of the favors at least. No, you provide for your family when it's needed, and then you just know that at someday it's going to come back to you, and you're not necessarily going to keep score. Guys, we are going to actually stop there. This is about halfway through the chapter. It was long. Tune in next week for that.